I am a definite love of all animals. And I remember years and years ago when Bob Barker was involved in this, Catherine Kramer, who's a good friend of mine, and all these people talking about specifically enough protecting wildlife, especially when we're talking about hunting. And my guest today is Eduardo Gonçalves, and he is the author of a book called Banned Trophy Hunting. How are you, sir? And thanks for stopping by.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and it's great to be on the show.
You know, so what happened? How did this all come into place and all this stuff? And Eduardo, and how you're kind of bringing back the history of this and how you've been involved in it. Kind of explain.
Sure. So I used to be the CEO of Britain's largest anti-blood sports organization. It was called the League Against Cruel Sports, and and that's when I first became aware of trophy hunting. And then I set up the campaign to ban trophy hunting specifically because I found out that they were going to bring back elephant trophy hunting in Botswana, which is the country that has the most elephants in all of Africa. So it's a country, it's not that big a country, it's probably about the size of the state of Texas, and yet it has one third of all of Africa's remaining elephants.
Wow.
And it had been banned, trophy hunting had been banned there under the previous president. And then a new guy got elected, and the hunting industry had been lobbying him, and they brought him to the US and showered him with accolades and so on, and they persuaded him to reopen elephant trophy hunting. And it was at that moment I thought, you know what, something's got to be done. There wasn't a concerted and dedicated specific campaign on trophy hunting, and I felt that there needed to be. I mean, you'll remember that 10 years ago, it's almost exactly 10 years ago, there was the shooting of Cecil the lion, and
Yeah.
everyone was outraged about it. And but that kind of left a slightly distorted impression of the reality because we were left thinking, hey, there's this one crazy guy, this one dentist from Minnesota who does this kind of stuff, and this one-off lion that's been shot. And so I've sort of thrown myself into the industry, and I actually went undercover for this new trilogy of books that I'm bringing out. So I spoke to trophy hunters. I joined the hunting industry. I met with hunters. I went and even visited the states where they did this and visited the workshops of the taxidermists and so on. And I found some really startling things. The first thing I'm going to tell you is since Cecil was killed 10 years ago, trophy hunters have shot another 10,000 lions for sport. And just to put that number into context, about in the 1970s, so about 50 years ago, scientists reckon there were around 200,000 lions in the wild. Now they say there's probably not even 20,000. And yet, in the last decade, since all of the outrage and anger and publicity that the Cecil scandal caused, trophy hunters have just been going out there and they've been shooting more and more lions.
Oh gosh.
10,000 lions since 2015.
Here's my point on this. Why? I don't hunt even deer. I don't hunt. And bottom line, because no. But I mean, to think about something, I think it's just an ego with a lot of people that are doing this. A sport, I'm going to do this, but we might as well be hunting humans if we're going to get to this level with what's happening because we don't want them to be extinct. I'm sure going on an African safari is one of the greatest experiences ever, and the live a bucket list thing for people to do. Yet, will there be that if we continue to allow this?
Well, that's it. And it's really interesting that you say that because I get asked a lot by journalists and by politicians and just by ordinary people saying, why do people do this? What goes on in the mind of somebody who does this? What makes them want to do it? And I've always been able to answer questions like how many are shot, what animals are shot, how they're shot, with what weapons, where they're shot, all the rest. But I couldn't actually answer that fundamental question is why and what goes inside the minds of these people. So that's what I've set out to do. And that's why I joined the industry and started meeting with these people is to answer that question. And I think I've managed to come up with the answer. And the answer is twofold. Firstly, they get an incredible thrill from the moment of the kill. And it's such a powerful chemical reaction that they literally become addicted to it. Let me just read you a couple of things that trophy hunters actually said. These are genuine quotes by trophy hunters. So they talk about, one says, the adrenaline starts coursing through my blood when I see the animals. Another one who shoots an animal said, this was the most emotional moment of my life. Another guy, and by the way, this guy, he's shot 5,000 elephants. 5,000 elephants. And he talks about the exhilaration and the goose pimples, and it's quite extraordinary. Another guy who shoots a bear, he talks about the fire of desire that he feels. Another one describes trophy hunting as an adrenaline-induced experience. And in fact, there was one guy, and he's the subject of my third book in the new series. He says it's like mainlining on heroin. So it is such a powerful drug, and they become almost helpless and hopelessly addicted to it, and they just have to kill more and more. And you find that there are trophy hunters out there today, not in the colonial era, but today, who are shooting animals in the most mind-boggling numbers. I mentioned the guy who shot 5,000 elephants. There's another guy who he's shot over 4,000 animals, including 1,300 elephants, 340 lions, and he's even shot a couple of gorillas. But he insisted that he only hunts in moderation. That's what he said. There's another guy who is the subject of my investigation. He said, you know what? I've actually lost count of the number of animals I've
Oh,
shot, but I do know that it's in the thousands.
who do you think introduced them to this? Because you're not just going to wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to go shoot lions,
Yeah.
hunt
Again,
lions
that's a really
and
good question, Ian.
gorillas and elephants. They're not just going to go do it. It's not like,
No,
oh, by the way, I'm going to be a trophy hunter now because it's
no.
expensive, I'm sure.
It's
It's not a cheap hobby. It's not like going out, getting drunk and going out and shooting deer. That's
No
for sure.
way. I mean, you go on a safari hunt for an elephant, that's tens of thousands of dollars, if not hundreds. And then you've got the taxidermy and the shipping. And of course, these people are shooting animals in enormous numbers. But no, how they get started in the majority of cases, so in about 80% of the cases that I've studied, they started really young. So they were introduced to hunting before they were even 10 years old. Many of them were given their first rifles, often just like a BB gun or whatever, but before they're 10 years old, and they go out with their fathers, their uncles, their grandfathers, and they get not just the taste for it, but they get the recognition from their peers, if you like. They're getting, that sort of male bonding experience, but it's also like an approval from their elders. And that's what sets them off. So many of them started at a really, really young age.
I'm, and what are the, how many are from the United States? That's a good question.
Over half. So over half of the world's top trophy hunters are from the US,
That's terrible.
55% if you want me to be exact. So I've studied, I've done a profile of all of the top 100 trophy hunters in the world today, and 55 of them are from the US. And then of the rest, there's quite a few Canadians, there's quite a few Mexicans, and there are some Russians. And then there's a few Europeans, so Spanish and Hungarian mainly. But the vast majority, they're from the US.
I mean, and you think about if they would do this, what else would they do that might be illegal?
Well, I actually used to work in law enforcement. That was my first career.
Okay.
And so when I was into sort of the research side of things,
All right.
and I know that I was all the time when I was doing this research and talking to people, I was thinking, I wonder what my colleagues would have said about this. There's actually a very prominent psychologist in Britain. He's called Professor Jeff Beattie. He's done some really, really interesting work. He's interviewed terrorists. He's interviewed all sorts of different groups of very difficult sections of society. And he's also done a study. He's written a book about the psychology of trophy hunters. And I did an event with him. I didn't know what he was going to say. And he said, look, I've spoken to and listened to and been with all of these people, including terrorists. And I can tell you the scariest people I've been with are trophy hunters.
Yep.
They are the ones with the least moral responsibility. These are the ones who are able to self-deceive, if you like, that are able to dress this up. A really good example of this is actually how they call themselves conservationists. So, for example, there's a Canadian trophy hunter. He went trophy hunting for 18 years solidly. So he would literally turn up at the Safari Club International convention, which is the biggest hunting industry convention in January. He'd buy a whole load of hunting holidays. He'd spend the rest of the year hunting, go back in the January, buy some more, go out hunting again. He did this solidly for 18 years. Now and he's written a book about this. It's called, I think it's To Hell With It, I'm Going Hunting. And he calls himself an avid conservationist. And Safari Club International, which is the industry body, it does that as well. So it has all these prizes, which are deliberately to encourage people to shoot more and more animals. They're a little bit like these, computer or console games that we see. And, where you have to sort of kill X number of aliens or whatever to reach the next level, then you have to kill a whole load more to get onto the next level and so on. They have prizes that are exactly like this. So, for example, the Hunting Achievement Award, it has 5 levels, goes from copper, bronze, silver, gold, diamond. So for copper, you have to shoot animals from 17 different species around the world. Then you've got copper, you get onto the next level, and then silver, you have to shoot 50 different animals. And then gold is 100 different animals. Diamond, the top level, you have to shoot animals from 125 different species. So it's not 125 animals, it's animals from at least 125 different species. And you think, well, who's going to go and do that? Well, Safari Club International in the last few years has handed out 300 of these prizes to people. 300. And the conservation deception is at the heart of this. So the very top prize that you can win from Safari Club International, and you have to shoot approximately 530, 540 animals to win this. It's called the World Conservation Hunting Award. The World Conservation Hunting Award. It's completely Orwellian. The Ministry of Truth being the Ministry of Propaganda and all the rest of it. It is straight out of 1984. And yet these people say it with an utterly straight face.
Well, it's just, but this is terrible. And how did you like being not, you weren't undercover either for these books, right? They knew who
Yeah.
you were. And how did you feel safe for your life
Well,
at
I,
times?
I did it with a colleague, and he did the riskier parts. I did some of the safer parts, partly just because I'm known. Obviously, I was using a false name, but if they saw my face or whatever, they'd recognize me because I do TV, I do radio, etc. And they don't like me. They know me, and I get all sorts of threats from them all the time. But it was, do you know what? My mental health suffered. And I'll tell you one thing, my wife was pointing this out just the other day, because I'm not a person who cusses and uses 4-letter words.
Right.
It's not because I'm prudish or I've just never been like that. But every now and again, she would hear me shout out a word, a strong word from where I was working on the book, because I just come across something that these guys had said. I mean, and I tell you the other thing that really disturbed me actually when I was writing this and researching it was this almost embracing of sadism. Let me just read again a couple of things which trophy hunters actually said, and this was in relation to hunting lions. So there's one guy, and this guy, by the way, he was the president of Safari Club International a
Okay.
few years ago. And he talks about a lion hunt. He said, "The lion's head snaps backward and explodes with smoke from my bullet." There's another lion hunter. He says, "I shot it through the left eye, blowing out the back of its skull." And then a third one says, "The arrow entered beneath the lioness's chin and took out her heart." Now, these weren't regretful statements. These were proud boasts. These were celebratory statements. And yeah, these people have a frame of mind that I think is very different to most people. And I think, well, put it this way.
I'm concerned that how many of them are criminals, and then second of all, or how much of this is illegal still going on versus legal? How many really are following the legal? If they're doing something like this, they are going to break
We
a lot more laws, and how many are really doing this legally?
There's a very thin line between legal and illegal. We know, obviously, Walter Palmer, he was found to be illegal, but only on a technicality because, it was found to be, he didn't, or the guys didn't have a license for hunting a lion in that particular area for that particular year. But actually, there's so many different tricks which they use. So, for example, what they call quota swapping. So, a guy over here doesn't have a license to hunt lion here, but they transfer it to somebody over there. And there's such poor enforcement. And there, there's a guy who he's shot thousands of animals, and actually, the police recently raided his home because they reckon that there was about 1,000 of the trophies that he had there were hunted illegally. And one of the big problems is the law, both national and international. So, the international law that relates to trophy hunting is CITES, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. And that's supposed to ban all hunting and poaching and trafficking and trade in endangered wildlife. And it has three different categories. So Appendix 1, they're the really endangered species, and you've got Appendix 2, which are pretty endangered, and so on. And Appendix 1 species include things like cheetahs. So cheetahs, they're the most endangered big cat in Africa. There's only 6,500 cheetahs left on the planet. And what CITES says is that Appendix 1 species, like cheetahs, they must not be hunted unless in really exceptional circumstances. There's got to be a real exception. The reality is that they're hunted completely routinely. You can go into Namibia, you can go onto the internet. Neil, you can go onto the internet right now and key in bookyourhunt.com. Bookyourhunt.com is like the Amazon for trophy hunters. You can put in any species you like. You put in cheetah, you put in elephant, you put in giraffe, and it will just spit out all of these results. In fact, if you want some really crazy stuff, you can put in seal, beaver, badger, skunk, squirrel, anteater. I mean, everything is on the table, and there's just no regulation. There's no laws, and people are literally allowed to get away with murder.
I mean, I'm speechless in so many ways. Where can we pick up your books? Hopefully, this brings the awareness it needs. My concern is if you make it completely illegal, there's still going to be problems. You need enforcement as well. You can't just make things illegal and say, okay, there's no one ever going to break the law to do this. No, they're going to be cold-blooded killers. They're still going to do this illegally, and you're going to have to enforce it. And depending on the country and how they really enforce the law is the other problem when you're talking about Africa.
Yeah.
So there has to be a world's police to police this and your movement. But where can people check you out?
So on Amazon.com, you can search for my name, and I've got a few of my books up there. So my two most recent books is there's 20 Elephants in 75 Minutes. So that's the one of the many boasts that a trophy hunter made. So 20 elephants in 75 minutes. So that's about the world's top trophy hunters today. And there's also another book which is Shoot One Lion, Get One Free. And that's about the trophy hunting industry, the companies that sell these hunting holidays, even to children, by the way. There was one
Oh,
hunter I spoke to. He took his 9-year-old son hunting with him. And this kid, he shot so many monkeys that he got himself a nickname amongst the hunting community there, the sniper. And this dad, he was really proud of the fact. Anyway, so shoot one lion, get one free, which is a genuine offer that's out there. That's also available on Amazon.
all right. We appreciate it, sir. Thanks again for stopping by.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
All right. You're listening and watching The Neil Haley Show.